right. Hello, everybody. Just give a good minute for people to start streaming in, and then we'll get started. All right, people are starting to flood in. I'll introduce myself. My name is Marko Mitrovic. I am a global project director here at Reuters Events in the pharma and healthcare sector, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. Webinar is Optimize Patient Engagement, Align Initiatives with Patient Preferences. We have a wonderful panel here today. Super excited to share, their insights, and I know it's going to be a great conversation. Just a few things for background for everybody here in attendance live. We do have a Q&A function available, so any live questions that you have, please pop them into the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to them either throughout the hour-long conversation or at the end of the conversation. The only other thing I'll say is if you've signed up for, if you've registered, you will be getting the recording in your inbox a day after the webinar, so look out for that. And for anybody that signed up or can't make it for the whole hour, that's going to be coming to your inbox, so you'll be able to catch the whole webinar either way. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to the panel and have some introductions, give everyone a moment to meet the panelists. So we could start with Anna Maria. You're at the top of my screen.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Maria Đurović. I'm head of the patient engagement in AstraZeneca Biopharma. By background, I'm a physician and over 20 years of experience across clinical research and pharma, mainly medical affairs, and just last 4 years completely dedicated to patient engagement.
Thank you. Bonnie?
Oh, thank you, Marko, and hi, everyone. It is such an honor to be part of this panel with esteemed colleagues. My name is Bonnie Pobiner. I am a patient engagement director with GSK, focusing on gynecological oncology in our specialty pipeline. My background, I have a doctorate in pharmacology with almost 4 decades behind me in pharmaceutical industry, focusing in the preclinical, clinical, and medical affairs area across multiple therapeutic areas, and the last 4 years in this current role, which is really the best role I've had in all that time. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bonnie. Beth?
Thank you, Marko, and thanks all you lovely ladies for being here with us today. My name is Beth Brooks. My background is in technical communications and public health informatics. I have more than 20 years in pharmaceutical experience, 17 of which are here with Sanofi, and the last 7 in various roles within patient engagement. And like Bonnie, my current job is my absolute favorite ever. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Beth. And Carrie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Yale, and I work at Boehringer Ingelheim. I lead a center of excellence called Patient-Centricity and Engagement, and we're focused on enhancing Boehringer's patient-centric culture, advancing the ways that we bring patient insights into the organization, and also making sure we have the systems, the processes, the training to really enable and empower the broader organization to do just that. I started my career in HIV and had the privilege of working with AIDS activists. And that was really the beginning of understanding the importance of listening to patients. At that time, they demanded a seat at the table, but I'm happy to say that both at Boehringer and I think now across the industry, and you'll hear from my fellow panelists, that it's not because they're demanding it, but because we all recognize the value in learning about the patient experience and preference and unmet needs. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for including me.
Great. So if it wasn't obvious, clearly we have a really stellar panel and super excited to get into it. So we're going to just do that. So I'm going to open the floor right away just for everybody to answer. But, every organization talks about patient engagement being the #1 priority and at the heart of everything we do. But, what does this really look like in practice, and how are we actually involving them? And so, to the floor, what strategies can be implemented to ensure their active involvement?
You better call a name or we're all going to fight each other for answers. Go ahead, Bonnie.
I will just say that it has really evolved to where it should be. And when I say it's my favorite role, it's because of that. I would say that starting about 14 years ago, that patient-focused drug development initiative, words that have resonated with me from, the FDA, oh gosh, I'm blanking on her name now. But, basically, the patients are the experts at what it is like to live with their disease on a day-to-day basis. And thank heavens, under the 21st Century Cures Act, probably one of the last times a bipartisan bill passed with flying colors through Congress, we are listening to patients, and we have evolved. When I started in this industry, you never really mentioned the word patient at the end as the end user. So just to kind of set the stage. And Janet Woodcock, that's who I was blanking on. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I agree, Bonnie, that we've seen a lot of change in the last 14, 15 years, and it's gone. We actually one of the very first patient panels I ever put together. The physician in charge actually said to me, "Why do we need to talk to patients again?" And I get that, right? You've been working this end of things for 30 years. What do patients have to tell you about designing a clinical study? But it's very easy to forget that not everybody works for a company that says you want to be in a clinical trial, hooray, and celebrates you and gives you that time and backs you. And so designing clinical trials isn't just about the disease. It's also about the human being who's participating in the clinical trial. So sometimes we can't really change too much about the procedures that we're going to perform or the number of visits that we've got to require, but there are lots of things that we can do to make it easier on the human being. And that's where we're starting to see things like decentralized clinical trials show up, and virtual visits and that sort of thing. So it's important that you start by talking to the patients, right? So that you're including them as human beings throughout the process. And from the very first, are we as researchers asking the right questions? Are we trying to impact the symptoms that are the most burdensome to you? And if you begin there, you can't go too far wrong.
Yeah, I would like to say that being in medical affairs for most of my life, and physician myself, there is a really interesting shift that has happened, because in pharma traditionally healthcare professionals were our key target customers. And there was also a stigma that we cannot involve with patients, we cannot do anything with patients, and it was often confused between you cannot promote to patients versus you cannot get information from patients. And I'm super delighted to see that, there is this evolvement of that, not only within the pharma, but also externally. As Bonnie mentioned, now we have regulators that are actually asking us and guiding us to do that. And I'm just hoping that this will extend to more and more beyond FDA, and then moving into EMA and the other regulators over the world. And not only regulators, but also health technology assessment, our payers. We need to look at ourselves in an ecosystem of the healthcare. And so we are one part of this ecosystem, but there are all of these other players. And in order to listen through patient voice, all of us need to work together and collaborate together. So I am very optimistic about where we are going right now.
Great. Carrie, did you want to add anything else to this?
Yeah, just to build on what everyone has said, I completely agree. I too remember a time when heads of therapeutic teams would say, well, there's not anything I'm going to learn that I don't already know. So I think we're all happy that we're not in that position any longer, that there's recognition that there's a lot that we can learn from patients. One of the opportunities I think I see is that, we're such a metric, and I know we're going to get into metrics, but we're so metric driven. And so a lot of times the business wants to know, like, well, what's the impact of this? What did we learn? What did we change? And I think we all have excellent stories to point to where there was significant insights that led to faster recruitment and better retention and better products as a result. But I think the hope and where we are today is that if we're truly co-creating with patients early, often, and throughout drug development, it's less about what changed, but more about what we created together.
Great. Yeah, and as Carrie mentioned, we'll definitely get to the metrics. And it's great to hear how, everyone's input and how we can work closely with patients. But another key aspect that I think I want to move to make patient engagement impactful is to, ensure that everyone within your organization is behind one vision. And so, Carrie, I'll pose it to you first, right back to you. How should we align internal definitions of patient centricity and, foster a culture that values these patient insights, and why would that matter?
I think it mattered to us at Boehringer because we didn't want patient centricity and patient engagement to be buzzwords. And I think we all can agree that we use a lot of acronyms in our organization, and we have words that mean different things to different people. So we clearly defined what it meant to us. And at Boehringer, patient centricity is about our mindset and our culture, and how do we help all employees put patients at the center. And that helps us to all be on the same page. I think the culture is important because you can't do what we do alone. So all of these wonderful women on the call today leading in their organizations know that we're very much dependent on our cross-functional business partners. And some of those business partners are very far removed from the patient, but getting them to understand that at the end of the day, it's our collective efforts that contribute to helping patients, I think makes us all work better together and more in the best interest of patients. And I would also add something that I've said over the years to leaders is that we're very fortunate in the pharmaceutical industry to do purpose-driven work. We're not making widgets. And because of that, mentioning to leaders that there's data to support that employees that do purpose-driven work have higher employee satisfaction and higher retention. And so the opportunity there is to really expand the understanding across the organization that everybody contributes, and to make that real for them, whether that's looking at, how many degrees of separation from their job to the patient is their work. And I think what we've discovered in our organization is that it's not as far as people think. And reminding them of that, I think, helps us all work better, more cross-functionally in the best interest of patients. So culture is key, because if you can increase your culture to being patient-centric, then I think patient engagement comes a lot easier, and also helps to ensure that the timing and the budget and all the factors that contribute to successful patient engagement occur. And then you're not getting the request on a Wednesday for insights they need the following Tuesday.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. And I guess just shifting to Bonnie directly, I wanted to ask, how the introduction of roles like Chief Patient Officer has influenced organizational shifts towards patient-focused development, and what impact has that had on actual pharmaceutical practices?
Thank you, Marco. Very timely. The Chief Patient Officer role, not every pharma has one, but I think that will change very very soon. And for GSK, I'm so excited that we do have a chief patient officer who joined earlier this year. And it's more than just one individual. It is a good portion of our organization, so much so that we are a pillar in and of itself, really standing between our commercial side of the business as well as our R&D side. And really the whole aim of having that role is we want to ensure that we deliver differentiated medicines and vaccines that address unmet needs for patients. So in terms of the how we do that, so we need to align our business decisions with insights from key external stakeholders, and patients are really very important. As you can see, we're taking the stance that we have a whole pillar of our organization to do that. And the impact that this has in terms of our pharmaceutical practices is that, where I reside in the organization under the CPO pillar in patient-focused development, we have a whole framework of patient advocacy and engagement. I know we'll get into that in more detail, but just suffice it to say that we have processes, ways of working, governance. It's a whole mindset for the organization. And I've been with GSK now for over 31 years. So I have seen things evolve, and this is really groundbreaking, I would say. And in terms of the impact on what we do, we have this slogan that we collect insights, we integrate them into our strategy so we can improve outcomes for patients. One of the big ways that we do that is that the team that I sit on, we have the responsibility of developing that. We call it the PA&E strategy, and our deliverables that we are accountable for. And we do that into a PA&E plan. It's across the whole life cycle of our medicines. Every asset, the high priority ones, all have these PA&E plans that are in place. And of course, it's not static, it's very dynamic. And to really, as I say, we're the syrup that coats and brings it all together. So we all make use of the power of the matrix. We're heavily matrixed. I reside on medical teams, depending on where my assets are in development. And I align all of my strategy with the medical strategy, the clinical development strategy, the brand strategy, so that that voice of the patient is carried through the whole process. I'll stop there.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Bonnie. I just wanted to jump to a Q&A question we had quickly before we get into, some more depth in the organizational stuff. And it's a good segue with the structure within. But there's a question asked, there's a notorious gap between what patients say and report they do and what they actually do. And so how much weight do you put on observations versus self-reports? And I'll pose this to anybody that might have any input.
That would typically be something that we would be more concerned about during the clinical trial. But I think that there may also be a gap, this kind of gap, when you speak to an individual patient, because everybody's journey through living with a disease is different, and what works for me may not work as well for you. So I listen to a variety of patients, and I listen to the advocates, and I listen to the researchers and what they've observed. And I think it's a matter of casting the net widely and not singling in on one person's report of, this is the way, right? There really is no such thing as the way when it comes to a person's health. So you combine the input of a variety of people and come to your conclusions based on that. That would be how I would account for that gap.
Great, thanks, Beth. So jumping back to the internal network, and we'll get to metrics in a little bit, but I wanted to just stick back to this, and I'll pose this to everybody. And, we can start with Anna Maria, actually, but, various functions from scientific to commercial, they really care about patient insights. And to do their jobs better. So how can organizations set up internal networks that allow these different teams to have access to these insights?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we face the same problem, but it's also not a problem because our patient-focused functions are relatively small and relatively smaller resourced. In AstraZeneca, that was done on purpose. So when we set up our patient-centricity strategy and goal several years ago, we said every single person needs to be a patient chief officer, and therefore we did not put a chief patient officer. So I think that conceptually, this is a great thing to have, providing that you have a valid infrastructure, foundations, and the capabilities built within the organization. So basically how we do it is that we have on the global level Center of Excellence where we put these infrastructures, foundation, patient engagement processes, different framework guidances, best practice sharing, and then we set up a network of people who are involved in patient engagement. That might be people who have this as part of their titles or could be anyone basically in the organization, both on the global level as well as on the markets and affiliates. And then we have different channels of communication. It can be through, of course, traditional emails, different webinars. We have workplace. We have dedicated group where we post news. I think it's really important to keep the conversation going and also to bring the case studies and best practices from different pockets of the organization, not only from the global. So we try to show with some examples, but not necessarily always lead the conversation because we see that our colleagues across the world actually could have a wonderful example of patient engagement and insights and applications. And they are actually, patients, they're no global patients. Patients are sitting in different countries. So therefore, our colleagues who are sitting in countries play a huge role.
Great. Thank you, Anna Maria. If anybody else wants to jump in with any insights on that. Okay, so jumping to another Q&A, I just wanted to get to it. But what do you think? Do you think that the next step could be towards a patient-led organization, or how do you envision this to be implemented? A question from Sabine.
Patients are experts at living with their disease, as I mentioned earlier. I think for us within Pharma, we have very strong relationships with those patient organizations. I have a global role, so I maintain relationships with global above country type organizations and ensure that, it kind of goes to that power of the matrix. I know, Anna Maria, you were touching on this. I would never do anything at the country level without having my respective GSK colleague know that I was doing so. And if it's something they can take care of, I'd rather they do it at the country level. So I do think partnering with patients is very key. I lead a couple of patient expert councils, and I view it as an honor, a privilege, and a responsibility. And always, let these individuals know that their voices are being heard and how we use that information going forward. So.
Yeah, I think that's key.
I'm sorry, Carrie, go ahead. Go ahead, Carrie.
No, please.
I just wanted to quickly say, how is the pharma led? At least most of our research-based pharma are led by science. So when we say we are a science-led company, that means that we actually include scientists across the world to help us to develop these breakthrough drugs, right? If we would say it's a patient-led organization, it would be interesting that we elevate the patient to the same level as we elevate the scientists. Meaning that if you have a steering committee for the new drug development, you have patients sitting on the steering committee equally as the scientists, because they're experts, as Bonnie mentioned, in their lived experience, and that expertise tended to be previously felt as on a lower level, less important, because we are driving the science and they don't have enough knowledge in science. I think if we flip this a little bit and understanding scientists know their job, but only patients who are living through that disease and experience can be true experts in that. And if you merge these two together, then you actually get really a patient science co-led company and organization. That's one way to look at that.
Terry, did you want to jump in?
Sure. I was just going to add to what Bonnie said. I think it is important as we recognize and ask for the lived experience of patients and ask for their insights and ultimately work more towards co-creation, that we let them know the impact that their insights have brought. I'm always reminded of a conversation that a patient shared with us where she was invited to give some feedback along with some other patients. And, together they really had a strong voice, and they figured, well, we're never going to get invited back again, so we're just going to tell them how it is. And they were invited back, and it was shared, the feedback that they gave and the changes that led to. And when she described in the hallway how they were high-fiving each other and embracing and the excitement that they felt, I think it's really important, to manage expectations. We can't change everything. Not everything you share is going to lead to us doing something differently, but to have that open communication and to make sure those relationships aren't transactional, but rather, there's a lot we can learn, and we want to share with you how we did something different, how we did something better. That one example has always stuck with me, and I think we all agree that being able to share with patients what we did differently as a result of their insights is pretty powerful.
Thank you for that. And as a follow-up, another Q&A question, and maybe Beth, you can jump in on this, but how do you involve then these patient reps beyond just including them in the clinical trials?
Oh, wow. So I'm going to kind of combine this answer with one of the others that I saw come up about co-authorship with patients. So we have long-term strategic partnerships with organizations, advocacy organizations in areas that are strategic for the company and therefore, for long-term needs. So Allergy and Asthma Foundation, for example, or network, Allergy and Asthma Network is one, because we are very big in that space. And we negotiate essentially a bucket of hours, and the use to which those hours is put in very broad terms, but we can use that time to send out an informed consent form and get opinions on that, to have people sit in on an advisory panel and review the design of a clinical trial that we're considering. We can ask them to do a one-on-one interview to tell us about what the burden of disease is. We can ask them to work with us to develop a tool that explains a procedure patients need to do at home, or to co-author a document that will support like a pediatric patient as they're going through the clinical trial. They'll sit in on meetings with us and say, I think you're thinking in the wrong direction. So, there are tons of ways that we can involve patients in the overall process. And we're starting to develop larger groups that can help us to solve problems as we run into them during clinical trials. The sky is kind of the limit on this. There was a great graphic done, I think by Tufts a few years ago, and I always keep that in mind. It shows all the variety of different ways that we can reach out to patients, and patients can reach back to us and say, this is what we think. And so it's a continuum. It truly is.
And I actually just want to keep it with you, Beth, here, because there's one thing I definitely wanted to address, and then we can open it up as well to everybody else. But, one of the main drivers to improve patient experiences is to improve health outcomes. But importantly, we need to ensure we're capturing a diversity of patients and their experiences. And so like, what are your thoughts here? And can we effectively integrate this into our strategies? Yes.
Not only can we should, we are. So FDA is among the first health authorities to start saying you need to do this, but they're not the only one for sure. And now every program needs to have a diversity plan. But we started well earlier than that. My team actually built kind of what amounts to a dossier describing the patient population within the United States in all its diversity and looking at the ways in which social determinants of health and people's various demographics and identities impact their journey through the disease. So the journey through, for example, prostate cancer is very different for a Black or African American man than it is for a white man. And so we look at that, we look at comorbidities, which can differ quite a lot across racial and ethnic groups, across age ranges, that sort of thing. And we provide all that information into the team before the first protocol is written, so that we're designing the inclusivity into the choices of endpoints, the choices of inclusion and exclusion criteria from the very beginning. And then we work hard to partner with organizations that meet at the intersection of identity and health. So one example of this would be Black Lives Matter, but there are many out there if you go looking for them. There's a great group for patients of Asian descent who have Crohn's and colitis that we also work with. And it's about listening to folks talk about the barriers to participation for them, and then coming up with strategies that attack the barriers. So if it's the cost of transportation because the site is really far away from you, and then we should be paying in advance for that, you should not come up with that as a patient. If it's about how much time you lose to work, can we look at sites offering evening hours, weekend hours? So we tackle the barriers as much as we can before we start enrolling the patients. And that, the other part we do is when we do a partnership with an organization or a patient community, we're making a commitment to that community. I think in the past, pharmaceutical companies were likely to dive in at the point when we rolled the drug out, and then you'd never hear from us again. And now you're hearing from us years before we have a product on the market, and we're staying with you. And we're hoping that even if product A didn't work out, that product B or product C will work out, but we'll still have that relationship with your organization and with those patients.
Thank you, Beth. If anybody else had anything to jump in, diversity, any other strategies?
Yeah, I'll just mention that, I was just chatting with a colleague the other day from our global demographics and diversity team, and it was really fascinating to hear all the tools that they make use of. They are front and center with every protocol that is developed. We have something, I believe it's called the Protocol Development Lab, and it's all these milestones. So you have to have your DEI plan as part of that protocol development. They make use of a lot of real world epidemiology data, have all kinds of tools. I'm not going to even go there because I would never do it justice the way they do. But suffice it to say that they're holding our clinical development teams accountable for making quota to ensure that we enroll the patients who are afflicted with the various diseases. And of course, patient input as well. We have councils of patients to, ensure that why do you need all those urines? Why do you need to have lab draws, 10 times? Why couldn't you do it 6 times? Things like that. It makes the small things that really matter for retention and reaching the patients that you need to reach.
And I'll share something that we've been doing. Obviously, there's a lot of efforts around clinical trials. The diversity action plans that Beth mentioned is really emphasizing the need to understand this earlier and better, and solving for the barriers and social determinants of health that might limit participation or make it more difficult. That's obviously important. But I think that representative voice needs to continue throughout. And that starts with understanding the demographic, understanding what we know and don't know. What does that look like regionally in specific markets that there might be a higher prevalence in certain patient populations? And one of the ways that we're trying to evolve, how we make sure we have representative voices, we a couple of years ago had a diversity and inclusion patient panel and realized that while that was effective at the time, we have evolved it to a much larger patient and care partner network, and making sure there's diversity of thought across the various diseases where we're working, but also to ensure that there's representative patient voices. And what's nice about having a network like this is that, we talked earlier about how do you make it easier for the broader business? How do you enable insights, earlier and easier? And with a network, patients that are already contracted with, where they have experience in clinical trials, or they have experience living with comorbidities, they've, been involved in providing input on their device or the packaging. Those are all collective experiences that can help us know that those are individuals that have the right experience to weigh in at different time points in the development journey where teams might need those insights. So really, really important. The patient organizations are great. And I worked for a long time in advocacy, and the work that they're doing is so critical. They also tend to connect with patients that are more informed, more empowered, have a stronger voice, and that's not everyone. So it's good, I think, to have a mix of both in the insights that you're collecting to ensure representativeness.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your input on that. I'm going to jump to the Q&A for a few that are related here. But one question is, what about any socioeconomic factors that might affect someone's ability to engage in health activities? For example, a single mom working full-time. How do we jump that fence?
This is where I go back to that, that early look at what the patient population is, what kinds of burdens they are experiencing beyond the disease. A single mom may have to work 2 jobs to afford an apartment that she and her child can live in and be safe. So she's going to have a limited number of hours. So we can probably consider, taking travel off the table as much as possible for her, and offering things like home visits, virtual visits, by decentralizing the clinical trials, so she doesn't have to travel to the site to get blood work done, but can go to her local lab, or even her primary care physician if they do lab work, to get labs taken. Offering childcare services, or in the absence of that, making it clear that children are welcome to accompany them on the visit if that's an appropriate thing. And offering prepaid debit cards for any expenses related to participation in the clinical trial. I often use personas, so I'll make up somebody and give them a whole series of burdens and challenges in addition to those related to the disease, and put people through an exercise to ask them, if you were to have this person participate in your clinical trial, how are you going to make it possible for them to do that without them having to make a significant sacrifice in order to do so? Because the more significant the sacrifice, the less likely someone is going to want to participate in a clinical trial when it's not a life or death situation for them. So, asthma, acne, there are all kinds of trials out there that are not about, there's no other cancer treatment for you, so you should go and try a clinical trial. And there's a lot of competition, so other people's trials may be better designed for their life. So, if you try on this persona and say, how would I get this person to participate? That seems to help people putting themselves in other people's shoes. And we do life in a day. So a lot of people who work here do a clinical trial simulation as a patient. And we do clinical trial simulations with patients from advocacy groups before we launch the actual trial itself to see if we've reduced the burden sufficiently. That's it. The burden isn't always about the disease. The burden of the clinical trial is entirely separate from that. And, just think about your busy day. How would you like to have to drive 200 miles to get to a clinical site, spend a few hours there, and then, resume your life? And what would that be like if every time you did it, you lost your pay for that period of time? Just step outside of your comfort zone and see what it's like for the people who don't have your advantages.
Thank you, Beth. So I wanted to move to something that there's a few questions about it, and it's something that we definitely wanted to touch on and the panel wanted to speak about, but it's these metrics. And so we're all invested in patient engagement initiatives, but it is important to ensure that the work you're doing is serving both patient and business needs. And so I'd love to hear from all of you, and I'm sure everybody listening would love to hear what metrics are currently being used to measure the success and the value of patient engagement. We can start with Ana Maria.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is a tough question, and I am sure, as my colleagues will acknowledge that. And as we look at it, I think you can look at it at several levels. So first, you would have operational metrics, mainly quantitative. How many clinical programs you have done with input of patients? How many studies built on patient insights? How many study protocol reviews, etc. Then you move, second level is measure patient engagement activity outcome. So what was the output of that activity? Was it applied? What was the recommendation provided by patients? And if not, why not? And ideally, obviously, feeding back to the patients in either of the cases. How many suggestions in study design we have done? How many, decreased complexity of the studies, etc. So this is activity outcome. Then a third layer would be a quality. Did we do the patient engagement activity with the highest quality? And here I would like the audience to maybe, if they are not aware of, PFMD, so Patient-Focused Medicine Development, has a set of wonderful tools for patient engagement, and among them is quality metrics, which we have adapted internally and work across that. It's really important that we don't just do the ticking the box exercise, but that we apply the highest quality of how we do that, and then measure that, and having the feedback loop with patients to understand that we can, what we can improve. And then finally is the one that is most difficult one, and that is the impact, right? And the impact can be seen in a different ways. So the short term, you can say, okay, if we are talking about in the area of the evidence generation, what was the patient experience in the study? So applying the SPFQ, the Study Patient Participant Questionnaire, Transcelerate tool, will help you in doing that. Then a short-term income, did we reduce number of amendments in the studies? Did we improve the shorter the study duration? Did we attribute patient outputs to multiple other initiatives than clinical trials, like patient support programs? Did we influence the labels? Did we have increased patient adherence to the medication in the patient support programs, for example? And then the longer term impact are the most difficult. And this is what we all are striving for, right? What is that patient outcome that we want to achieve in terms of, for example, did we discover diagnosis earlier? because we have done a great patient awareness materials with their input, did we have a better outcomes, less exacerbation, etc. So it is complex, and I think we should all go through this level by level until we reach the fourth one that, to be honest, it's very difficult.
Yeah, I can jump in. Oh, sorry, Beth. I can jump in, Anna Maria. Absolutely, echo everything that you have said. Impact is the word of the day, in our hallways. And I will say that, what is the gap? What is that unmet need? We haven't really talked about the patient journey. I know we all that is very dear to our hearts, and crawl in to really understand the journey that individuals face. And to me, the word patient, we're all going to be a patient at some point in our life. So I think if you take that into account, they're individuals. We need to address the needs. And so what are those gaps? How are we addressing it? So in terms of my area, patient-focused development, because we have that strategy, the PA&E strategy for our different areas, disease states, and assets, how is it being addressed? And then importantly, what is the impact of what we did? And how is that impact felt strategically for patients as well as the business. And just, a quick example, one of my areas in oncology, endometrial cancer. Oh my goodness, the space has changed so much in such a short period of time for patients. And it's fabulous. I'm very excited to see this, rolling out right in front of me. And so in terms of the gap, it's almost that the science is ahead of where we are for education, not only for patients, but for clinicians as well. So a big gap is really understanding biomarkers. And when I chatted with our patient council about this, the first thing one of our patients said, what is a biomarker? So that is where we started. And so there's a huge gap in that need and understanding. How are we addressing it? Well, I made sure to use, my matrix and pull in my global marketing colleagues to help address this issue, because we do have a product on the market in this area. So we can start educating not only the patients, but the clinicians as well, because patients are stuck. They're very much at the mercy of what their clinicians will know. So the impact is for patients. This is helping with shared decision-making, and also for the business, educating not only the patients, but the clinicians as well, so they have a better understanding of what is available to treat their patients.
So metrics for us, also about impact. We started by asking patients what success would look like. So if, from their point of view, what kind of an impact did patients want to have? And then our job became to make that possible. So some of the metrics that we pay attention to are things like label opportunities. So has talking to patients revealed that there is an unmet need that has previously not been addressed, that our product could potentially address, and therefore could become a label claim for us. That makes a difference for patients. It makes a difference for us too. So return on investment is very clear. We also look at changes in the protocol. So that can be things like reductions to the number of site visits or the number of procedures. We've had some success in getting approval for using archival tissue instead of an additional biopsy. We've had some success in changing certain visits to decentralized or virtual visits, making the burden on the patient easier. So quite literally, it goes back to the things that we directly, because the patient said they want it, they need it, or they don't yet have it, and it's causing them problems. We fed that into the process, and a change was made as a result of that. And that is where the impact has come through. And it started to become obvious within, broader echelons besides patient engagement, that we really want to hear this. I can remember sitting across from a couple of caregivers of a rare childhood disease and having the moms say to the doctor on the call, I'm not only not going to let my child participate in this clinical trial, but I'm going to call all my friends who have children in this space and all the advocacy groups and tell them not to let their child participate in this clinical trial because you're requiring them to do this and that's putting them at risk. And that was the end of the conversation, but the team went back to the table, the drawing table, and started all over again based on that feedback. That's the way that we measure impact, is when it changes something that we're doing for the betterment of the patients.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And I think depending, for those that are online listening, I think the most important thing is, where is your organization at with patient engagement, and being open to evolving your metrics. So I can't remember who said the activity-based metric, but that's where we started. And it doesn't necessarily measure impact, but you don't want to discourage teams when you're just getting them started. So frequency is a good place to start. Also, evolving that to what type of methods are used, and making sure that you move from, talking to a few patients to a more advanced method, and or looking at patient registries, and then sharing and amplifying those success stories. One way that we did that several years back was developed a newsletter and highlighted the patient engagement activities by method across the therapeutic areas. That sparked a little bit of competition, healthy competition. I think in the clinical trial space, the cost of amendments is a big motivator, but across the continuum, you can't always point to high ticket items that can be impacted based on insights. So just thinking about how you evolve the metrics over time. And the other thing, two other things I would mention is, I know there's a company that has successfully tracked from early research through commercialization the products they've developed with heavy patient involvement and those that haven't. And they've been able to show that those patients, those products that have had heavy and consistent input did better in the market than those that didn't. But that's pretty sophisticated. We'd all like to get there. And maybe some of my colleagues joining here today are there within their organizations. For us, I think we've had success in working in different parts of the business and what's going to work there. And so, don't be afraid to start with a framework or a blueprint that helps to really educate that part of the organization on the importance of insights, figure out how they're going to measure it within that function. And, hopefully you're not having to continually update that framework or blueprint, but it tends to work to socialize the importance and to bring that part of the organization along in having, metrics that they're looking at, but also impact stories that they can point to. And the more stories that you have to show the difference that an insight made, I think the more you can really move the organization along in their understanding of what it can do for not only for them and their team, but for the improved development of their asset.
Thank you, everyone, for your input on that. That was all really, really interesting to hear different perspectives too. So it's great to sort of put that all together. I think so. We're getting close to our time. And before we get into some takeaways, I wanted to quickly ask one more question that I thought would be very interesting for everyone to hear. And it's directly to Anna Maria, actually. But I just wanted to ask, how can pharmaceutical companies develop a framework to simplify and enhance patient involvement across the medical evidence generation journey? And what role does data play in evolving that framework?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I can share our experience, and it was quite a long journey over the few years. And as Kerry said, you have to start somewhere, then you evolve. So first, it was important for us to understand in the evidence generation, medical side, meaning post-regulatory studies. Why do we do that? And I think we addressed the why quite a lot, but ultimately, everything that we do should result in faster patient recruitment, better adherence, retention, data quality, and then most importantly, building the trust between pharma and researchers. So when we actually started the journey, we wanted to understand in the organization, why is this not happening systematically? We've seen the pockets of that, but not really consistently. So we apply the 3 kind of step methodology in development of the framework. First, landscape analysis internally, very, very broad one, understanding the barriers, and what it showed us that we worked in silos, surprisingly, that we have limited understanding of what patients need and want, that we have inconsistent processes, specifically end-to-end patient engagement, and that teams have quite a lot of time and financial constraints and worries. Then we looked at the external resources and saying, okay, what is existing out there? And again, I'm mentioning PFMD, PATI, WeCan, GPP22. We used all of that and engage cross-functional team in the ideation workshop. What is that they need that will help them to deliver their work better? That was the key question. And then when we had the framework draft, we invited patients in number of focus groups and asking them for their input specifically on the material that are relevant for them, the feedback questionnaires, etc. So when we launched the framework in 2021, it consisted of 4 different toolkits that were covering each step of the evidence journey. So early patient insights, study design, study delivery, and patient comms. But what we very quickly understood that's not enough. So developing a framework is not enough. You really need to embed it within the organization. So we had developed across the years a number of different tools that are useful for the teams. But more importantly is, how do you constantly communicate? How do you actually make it relevant for different functions who are all making this evidence generation happen? Customize that communication, and keep the momentum going. Launching is one thing, but you have to consistently bring this on the surface with the examples, with case studies, with best practice sharing. And so since then, I'm happy to say that we have a huge uplift in patient engagement activities across both evidence as well as the co-authorships and with patients and patients reviewers.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna Maria. So as we're in the last final few minutes, I just wanted to sort of pose to everybody, and we can just start back with you, Anna Maria, but if everybody could share just sort of one key takeaway that you want to leave with the audience and that you have on your mind based on what we've talked about and everything.
Okay, my key takeaway would be, as an organization, you can be patient-centered, but not necessarily patient-integrated. And so I would say that, to quote one of the patient advocates that I listened at a recent conference, nothing about me without me. So we should not be doing it for patients, but with patients.
Bonnie?
Yeah, so I can say that I'm just so energized after hearing all of this great information from colleagues, and I just harp back on the fact that patients are people, they're individuals, they're us, and like any industry today, the patients are consumers. I hate to be so blunt, but if you're not getting the services that you need, then we need to do something about it. And I just feel that we need to be good corporate citizens, if you will, and thank heavens we are evolving and becoming what we need to be. I wish it was like this when I started my journey in pharma almost 39 years ago. So thank you. This is a great discussion. I feel like we just scratched the surface. I could talk on this topic for much longer than we have left. So I'll stop.
Thanks, Bonnie. Beth?
One of my favorite images for working with the scouts that I work with on diversity, equity, and inclusion shows a student in a wheelchair sitting at the base of a ramp and a crowd of students at the stairs, and the janitor is clearing the snow off the stairs. And you know, the kid in the wheelchair is pointing out that if you cleared the ramp, you'd let everybody in, but you're only clearing the stairs. And I think that that is the attitude I try to take towards patient engagement, is that if we lower the barriers for the people who have the most difficulty participating, we are lowering the barriers for everybody to participate, and not just in the trial itself, but in opportunities to co-create with us, to give us feedback. So, you know, I encourage anybody who's really serious about patient engagement, and I count anybody who's on this call as being one of those, to think through that for themselves and say, what can I do today to lower the barriers?
Thank you, Beth. And Carrie?
Yeah, I think it's so important that we're doing things with patients, and want to give a shout out to some of my colleagues that just won an award at a conference that Anna Maria was at. And it was for a framework in device development. It was a blueprint. And I would venture to guess that part of their winning was not just because they created this great tool that would help to really ensure, you know, standardization and more systematic inclusion of patient insights across the device development process, but also that they did it with patients and with representatives of patient organizations, but also that they made it available. So it's available on the PFMD Synapse platform. And I think one of the things I've loved being in this space is that we share with each other. So I would encourage everyone on the line. Something that I've done is I have my village. I have the people at other companies that I talk to regularly, that I learn from, that challenge me. You know, we did Patient Week last year for the first time. It wasn't an original idea. It was Anthony Yanni at Astellas. And they did a patient month. We started with a patient week, but now this year we launch a patient month. Borrow from each other's ideas and build on them, and know that it's a marathon, not a race. You need your leaders to support you, but don't be discouraged if you're starting in one part of the organization, and just know that over time you can build the momentum and the importance, and you know, borrow those ideas that you like from others. And together, I think our collective efforts, it's not so much what we do just within our own companies, but collectively, I think it's the ways that we can improve patient lives globally.
Great. Yeah, what a great way to put a sort of ribbon on everything. So many different things to talk about, but great way to summarize it all. Thank you to everybody. That's the end of our time, but really appreciate everybody that was here live and all the participation. Sorry if we couldn't get through Q&As, but thank you for putting in questions. The panelists, of course, thank you so much for sharing all your insights. I and everybody definitely really appreciates it. Thank you. The recordings will be in your inbox, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.